Belgium, and look forward to hearing what you guys have to share with us.
Can you let me know when we've got about 5 minutes to spare so we can have some questions? G'day folks, been a fantastic day, hasn't it? Awesome. All right, great panel this afternoon. We're going to be talking about serious games. We'll give you a bit of context first, and then, as Chris suggested, we'll drill into some of the commercial opportunities and things in the space. So my background, as Chris alluded, is I'm one of the bad guys, military or ex-military. Spent a long time, 18 years in defence. Primarily involved in signals and later education. Most of my background, or most of my time spent, was developing e-learning, working in simulations, and creating games. The military, are the folks who brought us the internet, and as was suggested in an earlier panel, are also heavily involved in this sort of space. From the military's perspective, it allows us to engage in activities where complex decision-making processes are involved, where pieces of equipment are quite expensive and we don't want to go wasting bullets or rockets, especially as some of them, for example, one of the systems that we use every time a soldier fires a specific rocket costs about $75,000 to fire that, so you can see why there are benefits in the development of simulations and games that allow soldiers to practice the skills required to engage these weapon systems without the cost and all that sort of stuff and potential issues. The other sort of things I did before I became a university lecturer was primary school teaching, and the concept of serious games is very important within that sphere as well. Put your hands up here if you've got small kids, little kidlets at school, most of us. So most of you would be aware of bits of software that you hear the kids banging about, such as Mathletics. You've all heard of Mathletics? Even those with you without kids. Mathletics is a really good example of creating engaging content that allows kids to learn, most importantly, generally without knowing they're learning and engaging in something which can be quite dry, such as mathematics. If some of you are interested in mathematics, I'm very glad for you. I was never very good at it, so if Mathletics was around when I was a kid, I would be very, very happy. So those are some examples from me. I'm going to start off with a big question, and I'm going to pose it to the panel and ask you for an example of a serious game, just to give everyone some context. So serious games are games that are not primarily developed for entertainment, for those of you who aren't aware, so they're developed for some other purpose. So Katrina, would you like to give us an example of a serious game and the benefits of it?
One of my favorite serious games is called Never Alone, and it's basically cultural preservation and cultural history. The Inupiat tribe, which is an Alaskan Native American tribe, they are storytelling, and that's how they pass their culture along. And they needed to do two things. One was engage the youth in their own storytelling of their people, and the other was to fund one of their counseling centers. So they approached a video game company, partnered with them, and created one of their ancient stories about someone who goes and tries to find out why winter never stops. So basically it doesn't stop snowing, which means the snow doesn't melt, and they can't hunt because there's snow on the ground. So they go on a journey. It's a girl and a fox. It's called Never Alone, and it's also 2-player, so you can play with 2 people. One is the girl and one is the fox. And it's got amazing art because they had to take an Alaskan landscape, which is snow on ice, on snow, on water, and make it and create depth and something that's engaging. And it's also language preservation, which is getting really popular because it's actually in the Inupiaq language with English subtitles. So you hear them speak. There's little owls in the game, and every time you pass one, it opens a video that tells you about their culture and what that scene that you've just played means in their culture and how it's translated. So it's a really beautiful game. And it's not that it's not violent at all. You get chased by a polar bear, but there's no, and you can fall into the water and die, but you're not like shooting at people. It's not kind of, the thing that people think about when they think video games. So yeah, that's my favorite.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So Stu was telling us before about his Neomad comic, how you could switch between English and the indigenous languages as well. So the use of language seems to be a pretty powerful sort of feature in these technologies. Karen?
I don't have very many favourite serious games. So there's one I know of, which is strange for a company called Real Serious Games. There's one that I have played around with a little bit, which was around the banking system for the US, and you're given a pile of cash, and you have to basically run the country, and you can those of us who have, I guess, a bit of a bent towards social activism, you very quickly run out of coin in the bank because you keep helping people and trying to improve health services and education and what have you, and very soon the whole country's broke. So it's a really interesting game around capitalism. Yeah.
Excellent. Priscilla, you've been stewing away thinking about serious. I'm sure you know about heaps of serious games.
I do know a lot about serious games, but I think what is really exciting, and especially from the people we've heard from here today, is actually the experiences that have been created that's not just about fun and games. And being actually able to take the technology and use it for arts, for film, training, development, all those types of things. A really cool one that's in development that I've seen that I find very cool is actually to do with the health community and being able to work with people with Alzheimer's and dementia. So it was essentially a problem where with that, people then feel obviously quite out of their comfort zone when they're in an environment they feel unfamiliar. And being able to recreate a time and place that they still remember now and they feel comfortable in, and using then photography in that to recreate their childhood bedroom, for example, and being able to put them in VR and have that person all of a sudden feel very calm and centred again. So being able to take the technology and do that, I find really exciting.
Excellent. Just reflect on my own experience at CQU as well. There's been a huge interest, especially from the nursing and health faculties, with regards to embracing these technologies and using them for the delivery of teaching. Concepts such as professional empathy, nursing empathy is something we're working on with Professor Sue Davis, who's over there as well. So big interest from healthcare, which is an awesome segue, because Katrina, you've been working on a project that involves younger women as well and health as well. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Oh, well, that's not in VR, but hopefully it will be at some point. So basically, my PhD, I was looking at female protagonists and how they're portrayed. So I don't know, has anybody ever looked up girl games on the internet for any reason? What do you find?
I did it last weekend because I have a 9-year-old daughter, and it was her turn to download some stuff from iTunes. So we put in Warrior Girl, Strong Girl, Power Girl. It was so disappointing.
So you tried to moderate with warrior and things like that. If you just put girl and you didn't try to moderate it, what you would get is, first of all, lots of pink, and you would get makeup, maybe some ponies, a little bit of like, maybe a few unicorns. Usually, like, if you get animals, you're still making them over, like, so you can get puppy spa. And so what I've done is, in my PhD, I've had girls from the age of starting at 11 all the way through 22 play different types of games and give me their opinions on them. And so I did the beauty game just as a control, and then also things like Diner Dash, which the story has agency, but the gameplay doesn't, and then some of the more agentic games like Nancy Drew and Broken Age. And I've gotten some interesting reactions to the different games because I'm trying to make the point that it's not just about throwing a female protagonist in the game, it's about what she does. So that's, which is not a VR experience yet, but I would love to have adventurous female experiences in VR as well.
My daughter would love that. I've got a 4-year-old, and I struggle to find any sort of game that's appropriate, not only for a girl, but also for kids of that age as well. So it's an area that I'm really, really interested in as a parent. We're going to start to talk about some commercial opportunities, and I love science fiction. Put your hands up here if you love science fiction. Awesome. Movies like Back to the Future, #2. Who remembers there's a scene where Michael J. Fox was in the square and the big digital shark came out of the top of and it was like Jaws 25 or something like that? Yeah, I find cinema is a really, really good predictor for the future. You know, the Aliens movies, things like Total Recall. There's a scene in Total Recall as well, and this ties in with the sort of idea of augmented and mixed realities, where Arnold's character, Doug Quaid, I think his name was walking through a subway and he was trying to remain incognito, but everyone's got their eyes scanned and there's cameras everywhere. And as he was passing through this subway or train station, all of the posters and advertising were changing in context to him as he moved through and showing him things that he would be particularly interested in. I think it's a concept that's been embraced by advertising and marketing as the micro moment or something. But this was a long time ago. This film was produced, and it's hinted at the commercialisation opportunities that are on the horizon, and probably a good person to speak to about commercial opportunities would be Karen, once again, with your Serious Games. And I'd like you to maybe think about the current and maybe future or emerging opportunities for these Serious Games.
Yeah. So I guess you would have heard a lot about the term gamification, and there's a lot of applications in the out in the market at the moment in the HR sector. And it's around adding a little bit of a nuance to e-learning or the like that allows you to gamify a little bit of a process and makes the learning a lot easier. But the exciting area, I'll talk a little bit about what we do. The exciting area for us is in the VR now, and the fact that you can immerse people in real environments and train them in these environments. I guess from a commercialisation point of view, it's very much an early adopter market at the moment. It is very hard to go in and sell. So upstairs, we've got the demo room up there. One of the demos we've got is you're learning how to drive a train, and it's taking you away from the old style simulators that came out of the military. So we're in VR and you're learning via muscle memory, and we're working with cognitive neuroscience practitioners to design these learning experiences. But finding somebody who has an appetite to buy these experiences out there commercially, you've got to really find those early adopters, and it's for us at the moment. It's a global reach. You can't necessarily find somebody to purchase here in Australia at the moment, but the run is on. So there's the projection of enterprise, what they call enterprise VR, and when we're talking about VR, that is what the guys were saying earlier. It's VR, AR, MR, any of the R's. But there's a prediction that what they call enterprise VR will surpass entertainment VR in 2020. So that's not too far away. And so there's this massive push on how you can adopt these technologies into serious sectors to train people. And it's really interesting, but it is very much a space at the moment where you're still training people as to what is a HTC Vive, So I could walk into one of our prospective clients, and that's where we've got to start them, as what is this gadget you are talking about, before they even get their heads around how to use it to train people. Yeah,
I think might have been reading the same post, and it was talking about the percentages of entertainment use for these technologies versus the sort of enterprise or commercial. And I think the balance at the moment, I think it's about 60-40, and as you suggested there, it's going to overtake. So 40% of the overall market. So the people who are here today, people like myself who are artists, people like Stu who are doing a lot of sort of philanthropical projects, there's a huge commercial opportunity as well. So 40% of all of the people who are going to be involved in this stuff are going to be corporate, want to use it for their enterprise. And probably maybe some of you here are from organisations, businesses at the moment who have good ideas for how these technologies could be applied in the commercial space. I think it's a really, really exciting area. Priscilla, your HTC Vive, do you get approached by some of the sort of, I guess, the opportunities that Karen was talking about before? Do you get companies coming to approach you with different ways of potentially using, as we saw with Jameis before, using the Vive, or seeking advice for exploiting commercial opportunities?
So I think, as Karen said, it still is very much in the early stages. I think a lot in the enterprise and commercial world are still understanding that it's not just gaming. So there still is a lot of that happening. We have started having some, definitely architecture and property kind of got on board early. and they definitely saw how this can change their interactions with their clients, and how VR can actually help in that space. We're starting to see other industries come through, so definitely looking at training. It is a bit chicken and egg, because generally what commercial needs is the enterprise sector needs bespoke content created specific for their business. And if that content's not already there, then often they can't visualise exactly how that would be. So one of the things I do in my role is knowing who the developers out there that are producing content for in the commercial space, and being able to pair them up. So when there's a company that actually goes, well, we want to change the way we train our staff, we want to be able to reach more people, I can have them actually be more engaged rather than them sitting in a remote place from where their main office is and hoping that they've watched that video that they sent them to learn something. Then being able to pair those people up together is I guess, part of what my role is.
Okay, so you maintain like a list of sort of approved HCC 5 developers, and I guess you keep an eye on the things that are evolving as well in the space.
Yeah, so not so much an approved list. I guess, I go out and meet a lot of developers and see what it is that they're doing. Gives me a good understanding of their capabilities when I am approached by a business. I make that introduction. Obviously, where they take it from there is up to them. So I usually will make an introduction to a few different developers that I think could work with that business and provide a solution. The developer then goes about putting together a pack and pitching to them and working out what's best. Yeah.
So in terms of, current markets are kind of relatively straightforward, but are there any emerging markets or people who are coming and approaching you about sort of uses for the technology that maybe sort of make you think about the product slightly differently? Or
Yeah, so I think some of the really cool ones is things like the government's actually really starting to get involved in how this technology can help. There's been a project down in Melbourne with a company there called Snowball that actually they're redoing Hoddle Street, which is one of the bottleneck streets, I guess, in Melbourne. And instead of having to, where they'd before obviously redo the whole street or build a model and go, yeah, that all looks good, and then go and redo the whole street at billions of dollars, and then realise that actually that was a bit wrong, and then have to go and spend millions more to fix it. They've actually gone about now creating it in VR, so it costs thousands to many $1,000s to create that, but still a lot cheaper than billions. And being able to then actually put people through that experience using eye tracking, they're actually able to then tell, actually, if we put a seat over there, is anybody even taking notice that there is a seat over there? Or actually, no, everybody keeps looking that way. So let's move where that seat is now in VR. Let's put people through again and actually understand what people actually want to see in the street. So things like that, I think, is a good example of where commercialisation for VR is going.
Okay. And Karen, are you seeing, are there any pockets of industry that are, or enterprise that are popping up and that are surprising you with requests for your services as well? Because how many products do you actually produce in a year? Like your team at Real Serious Games in Brisbane how many people do you employ there at the moment?
We've got 17 at the moment. We've got and we're still very service based because our customers want bespoke products. But now with the advent of the Samsung and the App Store and the like, we've just developed our first product to go to market on the App Store, which I'm going to try and put Sarah through if she's around somewhere, because when she was in her bubble, I just went, oh my God, because we've put out confined space training. So we're having a look at all of those high risk training requirements for companies. And in that training sector, there is this need for a big shift. And industry knows that. They just don't know what to do. So if you can get in there and have the right conversation with them, they are ready to spend now. And because training has been a bugbear now for many years for all corporates. And if you can come up with a good way to get in there, we're targeting refresher training, so all of those types of training that you need to upskill every 2 years to keep yourself valid, for instance. So there's a known market there. We're going in on the Samsung, so again, it's mass market. We can send it anywhere. But yeah, it's really, for me at the moment, there's things like the example there, well, a lot of these major infrastructure projects, they are looking for a differentiator. And and how their project will succeed ahead of somebody else's, and then training for us. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I think the idea of mitigating risk is a really powerful driver for these things, and the example that you gave about the confined space, I mean, to practice that stuff in reality is dangerous and it's expensive. So it's a similar sort of driver for, I guess, defence embracing these sorts of technologies into their training as well. And the whole idea of refresher or just-in-time training allows people who are employed in a variety of potentially dangerous environments to access that training and go through it again and again at leisure. It's like when you're in class and the teacher spends an hour telling you something, and then put your hands up if you've got any questions, and even if you don't understand the content, you won't put your hand up. You won't be that one person who puts their hand, sorry sir, I didn't understand. So providing or using technology to create learning experiences or gamified learning experiences where you can play a scenario over and over again and get it right at your own time and without embarrassing yourself or perceptually embarrassing yourself in front of your peers is pretty powerful, I think.
Can I just add another example in there? Because this comes from the other speakers earlier, and that I found really, really interesting. We've been talking to a train operator, so one of the companies that operate all of the trains on the network in Australia here, and I'm probably going to quote the wrong statistic, but I think it was they're suffering now about 8 suicides per month on the train line. So people are no longer jumping off bridges; they are jumping in front of trains, right? And it's awful, and it's awful for the train drivers. They end up with PTSD, and so we've been asked to consider how you can retrain these train drivers to get back into trains again quickly, because it takes you also a year to train a train driver. So you imagine if you've got that number of incidents occurring and you've got that many drivers being affected, you can't actually then keep the drivers up to the trains anymore. And there has to be another way to retrain these guys. And so they have actually, we have been approached for a solution in VR. But again, it's that's a fairly bespoke thing, but I was really interested in what the other guys were talking about earlier with the PTSD. Yeah.
And I think the idea of, we're all here, interactive storytelling, that's the main sort of gist behind today, I guess, and weaving this sort of interactive narrative into those, into that example, I guess, for the train drive would be, would enrich the experience as well.
Yeah, and I think it's about also getting them more comfortable in a train again. So they don't even want to get into a train cab. So it's getting them back into that train cab. So how can we do that? Let's do it virtually. Let's get them back in there again and then get them back into the real thing. Yeah.
Excellent. Katrina, I'm going to throw it to you because you're involved with the Bachelor of Serious Games at USC. So how important is interactive storytelling to the development of serious games? And have you got any examples you could share?
With serious games, there's always two aspects. You want to teach the subject that you're trying to teach, whether it's something you're trying to inspire activism about or history. We get approached a lot with people trying to create history with serious games. And then there's also the game goal itself. So with stories, it's the reason to be there. So one of my, I haven't made this, but my dream is to make a game where you're in Pompeii, like 24 to 48 hours before Mount Vesuvius explodes, and your job is to get somebody out of the city without letting anybody know why you're getting them out of the city, because they're supposed to live. It's their destiny or whatever. But
I think there's a Doctor Who episode about that. I think
probably.
I remember.
But you can take people back to places, and even with mixed reality, I can see another point of commercialization is revitalizing things we already have. So you'll read something like, oh, behind the Mona Lisa there were 5 other paintings, but you can't see them when you see the Mona Lisa. But in augmented reality, you could stand there and flip through the layers, or you could go to Rome and see the ruins, and then flip something on your AR and see what it looked like back in its glory. And so you can revitalize tourism, you can revitalize museums, you can go to an arboretum and see like this little sapling and what it would look like as a tree, and vice versa. So the story is what gives you a reason to be there. So for instance, earlier today I was talking to somebody about a project where businesses might need you to like go around the city and know where everything is. And so one of my favorite movies is It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. So the scavenger hunt gives you a reason to, for instance, go do that. So story is just, it's framing, it's the reason to be there, and it's also a reason to come back, because you can have one story, or you can do nonlinear, or you can do branching. So it's one experience, but it's different every time you go in. And so, yeah, story is it's everything.
It is, because graphics, computer graphics, as we've heard today, have evolved to the point where things are so realistic. So there's a big push for, I guess people who can write, who can craft really, really good interactive stories to hook the players. Karen, let's talk about career pathways. How did you get into serious games? What sort of people are you looking for? What sort of skills are you looking for? And are you looking for people at the moment?
Yes. So my path is a bit of a strange journey. So I'm not I'm unique, I suppose. So I'm not I came out through engineering and spent many years in construction. But one of my things I learned and things I've always been fascinated about is how you can teach people spatially. Once you take a group of people on a construction site, a lot of them can't read drawings, but if you put a 3D model in front of them, they've suddenly their capacity to construct that major project changes dramatically, and I've always been fascinated in that from a learning point of view. And so when the advent of VR, it was just nonsensical to give up your career chasing cranes around Australia and start a technology company. But our company also is a bit unique because we are a blend of civil engineers, we've got an electrical engineer, and then we've got our computer games developers, and that speaks to building these gamified solutions for industry. And we're always looking for those same sort of people. We're looking for engineers who are excited about working in the gaming industry, and we're also looking for software developers and generalist artists. So for us, a lot of our work is engineering based. So you can come in as an artist and go, wow, I want to work with Real Serious Games, and we'll have you doing very spatially accurate, geometric kind of building stuff, and it'll drive you nuts. So our artists are those that enjoy doing spatially accurate work. And yes, we are probably, to answer your question, in January, we are going to be looking for a few more staff because we've just won a contract to build a certificate in building and construction in virtual reality. So we're going to be manning up to do that, yeah.
Excellent. I'm going to have one more question for Katrina, and then I'm going to flip across to Priscilla, who's going to tell us all about the future of HTC Vive. She doesn't know about it yet, but she's going to think about that now. I've just planted that seed because there was a question raised a little bit earlier on about the headsets, because in game design we have this concept of Huitzinger's magic circle, which is an immersive space. When you're playing a computer game and you're sitting in there, you lose track of time. You're in this little bubble, and it's not until mum says, come and do the dishes, or something like that you actually go, to go get back to the real world. So having used VR and Tilt Brush to a degree, not as much as Stu and the rest of the folks, it's a very, very immersive environment. But one thing that brings it all crashing back down is this thing here tripping over the cord in virtual reality. So hopefully Priscilla will think about that whilst I just talk to Katrina about, or just lead on from the commercialisation. So you guys run a Bachelor of Serious Games at USC. In terms of employment opportunities for the students, do you find that there's opportunities for them in this area, so within the South Queensland area, or are they having to go further afield, or are they working remotely for people overseas? Do you have any info?
Well, our degree program just started in 2016, so we're barely actually graduating anyone yet. We have had, I think, 2 people that have been hired as programmers already, and that was off of the major, which it was a major before. It was a bachelor degree. I see them getting, I see VR and mixed reality in general sort of the way that, sort of at the cusp of, blowing, getting really, really big, kind of like the beginning of the internet, where we went from what's a web page to I need a web page, can you make one, you're hired.
Yeah.
And I think within the next couple of years, it's going to be kind of like that with mixed reality experiences. So I see a bright future ahead of our storytellers, our programmers, our artists, because everything that we want in VR, as we said earlier, the hardware is coming along, but the content needs to be there. And I can see an explosion of people wanting content, which is what we train people to do. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There were websites, everyone wanted a website. Got to have a website for business. Then mobiles came along, I need a mobile website and mobile apps and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, the mixed reality sort of component is the next step along from that. It's just natural sort of progression. And speaking of natural progressions of technology, do we have any... In China, I think earlier this year, you guys released the wireless version of the HTC Vive. I think it was maybe a little bit less powerful. Can you give us any information about any of your products or new and exciting things that might be on the horizon?
Well, I think the first thing is, I'll give the political answer, we're always working on the next thing. We have thousands in our R&D team that are constantly working on, as soon as we release a product, they're already on to the next iteration of that and where that goes to next. And we drive that two ways. So whilst we're primarily hardware, that's what we do, what we make and sell, we rely on content developers to be able to help drive what it is that's needed. So the question earlier around, I can't remember who asked it exactly, it was someone down here at that point, around when it's going to get to a point of not having to have such a bulky headset and that on. So we are working towards that. There are partners that we work with that are bringing out things. TPcast is a partner that we worked with. We have an accelerator program because we know as great as we are, there's other people out there that we want to inspire to also come up with some great initiatives. So TPcast is essentially a battery operated one, which means that therefore it takes away the cords connected to the computer for Vive. So answers one of your things there. I can't talk too much about our next iteration of Vive.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. We won't tell anyone.
Let me go get the clauses out. No. What I can talk about, though, as well, is our standalone VR, which is, we've announced, we haven't announced a launch date yet, but essentially what that is it's being able to get the technology out to more people. What we launched in, it was actually Japan, not China, earlier this year, was one where you put your mobile device in it, so similar to a Google Daydream or Samsung Gear. What our standalone VR, though, is that it doesn't require, so our current Vive, you're required to have a gaming computer essentially to run it. And, you know, the Google Daydream and that run off a mobile device. Our standalone VR is a standalone device, so it has all the capability built into the actual headset, so you don't actually have to have anything else. So you don't have to have a particular type of mobile, you don't have to have a high-powered computer. So we are always working on those technologies. When it will get to a point of not having to have a headset on, it's probably still a little way off, but we are definitely always doing that. I think the biggest things, I think the team answered it really well earlier, is that the cost, so getting to a point of the things we can make, but then what the cost of that is means that you can't sell any because it's out of everyone's reach. So there's a few things there, I guess, that drive it. And then with the developers and that out there really often, you know, provide us with things that is the problem for us, you know, for them, that's restrictive for them and something that they want to make. So all of you that go out there and want to make something in VR, that's the type of things that when you then come across something that you're like, well, the hardware's not capable of this, that's what drives our R&D team to go back and go, how can we overcome this problem? How can we get around it? And how do we still make sure that it's then cost effective for people to be able to experience this? Yeah, that's my political answer.
Excellent. Very well answered. I'm getting two fingers up from Chris, and they're the good ones, not the bad ones, so that's okay. So we're going to open up to two questions. Yes, two questions from Chris. One, gentleman over here, the hand went up straight away, and this young fellow over here, going to get a microphone out to them.
Thank you. I'm interested to get an example, perhaps, of how this technology could be used in the healthcare sector, and examples that are perhaps used for rehabilitation or used for mental health, how this might shift a hospital's ability to improve the mental health of their patients rather than just the physical health. Are there examples that you have that you're fans of in this area?
So there definitely are a lot working. The health sector has really gotten on board with VR and sees the potential in it. So in regards to mental health, I actually was at a hackathon not long ago, and in a weekend they built a program that was able to... One of the things with mental health they've recognised is that if you can talk about it, if you can visualise it, it actually helps you be able to deal with those feelings better, to be able to move on rather than just using medication, so in conjunction with that. So they actually built a program to be able to put you in VR, put you in, I guess, an environment that feels safe and comfortable, and then actually being able to choose what you're feeling at that moment and being able to visualise those out there. And they actually then took that into some hospitals and did some... tested it out with patients and that with suffering from depression, to actually then test, I guess, being able to get them to a point where they can then reduce the medication and have them integrate back into having a more fulfilling life. So I think that from a mental health. And then I've seen a really amazing one from physio. So anybody that's ever done anything where they've had to have physio ongoing after breaking an arm or something like that, thankfully I haven't, but the biggest thing that happens is the person goes home and it's boring to have to do that same exercise. So it might be that you have to do this 30 times a day, over 10 different lots or something. And invariably what happens is most people, like me, would get lazy and would stop, or it would just end up being a bit like this, and your rehab takes longer. By getting people in VR, we can actually develop it so that therefore you might be pulling an arrow back or something, and it's actually to be able to fire off the arrow. If you like this, it won't fire properly. So it enforces them to do this. It's, gamifying it or making an experience, and therefore it's a lot more fun. People are more likely to then get in and actually do that and be able to get their results that way.
Even from the simplest perspective, I think art programs are used a lot by the military for helping soldiers recover from PTSD. It's over the last couple of years, a lot of those sorts of programs. Using a tool, I see this as the evolution. I don't think they're using it yet, but using something such as the tilt brush in the HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, I think would, as Stu suggested earlier, it literally blows your mind. If you've never actually had to play inside virtual reality space, creating your own artwork, it's an absolutely mind-altering experience. Having the headset on as well totally obviously immerses you in that environment, and you tend to think a lot more about what you're actually doing, and being able to step around the things that you're creating, and whether you're exploring your own mental health issues through your artwork or whatever, I think in 3D space is just going to be mind-altering. So if you get an opportunity later on to maybe duck into Stu's work and put it on and maybe have a go of the tilt brush if you've never used it before, absolutely amazing.
Also, there's been work with phobias, with managing, exposure therapy in VR. Also, one of the things that I've seen is the virtual dementia experience, which is actually, they're working with dementia patients to recreate their own environments, but the virtual dementia experience was actually for caregivers. So they've talked to people with dementia, and they would take the information and put it in VR. So for instance, someone with dementia, if the light hits the floor a certain way and it's a tile floor, they won't see the glare, they'll see a hole. So when you're walking with somebody as a caregiver and they stop and they won't step forward, the caregiver is going to get really impatient with them. If you understand that it's the lighting and they're seeing a big, huge hole right there, that's why they're not stepping forward, then you can change the way that the room, is styled. They show things like if it's striped wallpaper, they see it as moving lines. And so it's basically putting that person in an empathetic experience, and also it can be used to style environment, or kind of or at least help people maybe even ask the questions. What do you see right now? Why won't you move forward? Why won't you do this? What is it that you're seeing and experiencing? To help the caregivers have more patience with the actual patient. So it's there's a lot on both ends. And there's also, I haven't read this directly, someone told me about it, but there's apparently also a few virtual experiences that are kind of helping people who have paralyzed limbs possibly feel more of a sensation, and they're trying to see if they can get them to actually move and kind of rewire some of those circuits by putting them in a position where they kind of are virtually moving. So a lot of exciting things ahead.
Excellent. Young